Hello everybody, this is GeorgeAnn Hughes, and this is the Byte Show. And tonight, it's a real special blessing to have Douglas Riggs and Dan Webb with us. And they're going to talk about the topics that are kept usually very hidden. And we've done several of these, concerning SRA, DID, and this is a real important topic. So I want everybody to listen carefully. You might want to get a pen and paper so you can jot down some notes. You never know. But you can also find these audio files that Douglas Riggs and I have been doing at the Byte Show. Go to the audio library, click on Douglas Riggs' name under Pastors and Teachers, and his special page will open up with the links to the archive, all the audio files there that are archived. And I ask, please do read the bio. Who is Douglas Riggs? This is a very beautiful and sensitive bio, so I ask that the listeners please read this. Hi, Douglas.
Hello, GeorgeAnn.
And hello, Dan.
Hi, GeorgeAnn.
How are you doing this evening?
I'm fine.
Good. That's good news.
Well, thanks again for giving us this opportunity, and
yes,
grateful for those that are interested in hearing more from, Dan's testimony and history. And I thought, just by way of introduction, I would first of all, Dan has demonstrated a tremendous commitment to God's work here for 30 years, and so I'm very appreciative of the place that he's had in our history as an assembly. And when Dan first came forward, which was already shared, becoming aware that he had some issues in his life that were not resolved just by hearing the Word of God. And what I mean by that, trauma-related issues cannot be prayed away or studied away. You have to deal with trauma. What's broken is broken. And so,
see, Douglas, I'm so glad that you said that, because a lot of people don't understand. They really don't. And you are so correct that trauma issues have to really be dealt with head on.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I appreciate people like Russ Dizdar who have committed to, not only pursuing the occult agenda, but seeing people restored. And there are others that we work with, Tom Hawkins and Dr. Preston Bailey and Joe and Sherry and Karen Sackett, people like this that they've given their lives to see people restored, and I so appreciate all their commitments. Dr. Pam Mundy and Ellen Lachter, these people they've given their whole lives. I'm sure I've missed some, but it's important to know that this is real, and as Lynn Marzulli says with reference to the UFO phenomenon, it's growing and burgeoning and not going away. Well, I'd say the same thing about, the generational SRA DID as it began to really explode onto the, to our historical horizon in the early 90s. That was the decade of the awakening, as Dr. Randy Noblet has said. That was the year of the real awakening, or the decade of awakening. We just were immersed in it, and one time we had over 19 multiples at our church, our assembly in the early 90s, and a lot of that produced a great challenge to all of us, and our church went from 100 down to about 30 when I made an announcement that I was going to give a seminar on SRA DID after I read Dr. Jim Friesen's book, Uncovering the Mystery of MPD, and two-thirds of the church left because, that was not palatable. That seemed to be outside the framework of what they considered as a church. But, with Dan, and while he's here tonight, I thought I would just say that as we began the journey in 1990 counseling, and with him, I think it was around 1990, 91, and this is just from a clinical standpoint, and most of my training outside of just biblical counseling has been more on a clinical level because I wanted to understand trauma and not try to, I realize you just can't pray away trauma symptoms. And, like Dr. Jerry Mangazi has said in a number of his seminars, it's magical thinking to think that you can just, pray away the symptoms and just assume they're all demonic. So my background, and I went to every seminar that I could go to that were professional, psychiatrists, psychologists that are trying to, they're in postgraduate work trying to understand how to work with these people, and they were even doing it pro bono because they were not trained, they did not understand. So in the work, there are a number of classifications in DSM-4, but Dan would never have been diagnosed as DID. I don't believe that all the symptoms just presented as borderline. And borderline is just basically the tremendous damage that has come to the core person that just leaves them so devastated that everything's basically black and white.
I'd like to ask a question, Douglas. I'd like to ask a question. What, in dealing with this like you have and with your experience, what are the distinguishing marks between demonic possession and what you're talking about?
That's a good question. If you take someone who is not divided and they're demonized, my experience and my counseling work that I've done, 1 or 2 sessions they can be free.
Okay.
So it's pretty quick. It doesn't mean they're mature. They need to pursue discipleship issues and growing up and getting grounded in the Word. But when it comes to demonization, if there's no splitting, that is trauma-based disintegration of the person's identity, then the demonization issues can be taken care of in a very brief amount of time. But if you compound the demonization with purposeful trauma-based mind control, where there are specific protocols that are used by Nazi-type doctors, and with the folks here that come out of royal families, their biological father actually paid people like Mengele and Bowlby and people like that to even do that. Yeah. To be present when the trauma occurred. And of course, Mengele, he was not only a doctor, but he was a sorcerer. So during the traumatic events, principalities and powers would be channeled in and layered around at the deepest level, attached to the human spirit, and then the demonic. And I make a differentiation between demons and fallen angels, as do the Jewish, the ancient Jewish rabbis. Yeah. And then in the soulical area, there's more of the demonic attachment. So, to answer your question, is that when you're dealing with demonization that is attendant to dissociative identity disorder or trauma-based disorders, it's very complex because it's layered between the person's trauma responses and then their own psychological defenses of denial and every way of escape from the trauma that the human psyche can, conjure up. It makes it very complex. So in order to free a person from demonization, you've got to work through the layers of a dissociated self to ultimately free them from all the demonic infestation. So it's quite a complex and long drawn-out journey, and many churches don't want to touch it, and understandably so. I mean, I remember years ago, I read it was Neil Anderson. He's a great guy. He's written a number of books, Bondage Breaker and Victory Over the Darkness, and he's really a great guy. But I read one of his books, and he had a couple chapters on DID, and he had written on them. And as I read them, I read these chapters. I just said, he doesn't have an understanding of what it is. And so at a conference, I went up and told him so. It's hard. And he was very frustrated when said, well, what needs to be done, basically. And I said, it takes time, and here's what's involved. And he says, I don't have time for that. And I said, fine. And I said, are you going to tell those that are people like me and other pastors who are committed to help these people that it doesn't take time? You don't take time? And so he just kind of walked away frustrated, but he came back a couple of years later and stood up and funded 700, 800 people and apologized for misrepresenting NPD and in a very humble way, and that really won the hearts of those who were somewhat offended that were multiples. And of course, with the multiplicity goes a very carefully structured and layered infestation of the demonic. So that's kind of a long answer. I hope it's not too long.
Well, it's a very straightforward answer to a very complex question. I know.
It is, because we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and so it's God's way. I mean, what's there is there. It is not. We can't say, well, it should take this long. And getting back to Dan in particular, because that's who he's going to be spending the time sharing what he feels is important. But he presented primarily as borderline until almost maybe a decade into our work, and then we began to see some shifts into younger states, but not really highly complex from the standpoint of number of aspects of dissociation, because he was not structured for that reason. But just the battle that we have shared together, the long-term battle, and it has been a very long journey. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of hours, I don't know, just to get to the place where that which the enemy has stolen through trauma, to have these areas released. I'm talking about areas. I'm talking about aspects of the human spirit and that which is the deepest part of the person's identity, the neshama, that area of knowing, Proverbs 20:27, and Job 33, where it talks about the neshama is the way of knowing and understanding. When that's released, when you're past all the programming and you're past all the layered stuff in the area of the soul, you get down to the realm of the human spirit. This is where the real strongholds are, and it took us a long time to get there. And it's in this region where we have the interfacing with the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and the global phenomenon that I've spoken about before in Isaiah 25:7, the veil that is stretched over the nations and the web that is woven over the people. So this can only be understood on a spiritual level. I say only understood. At the deepest level, it can only be understood on a spiritual level. But it's a real pleasure to have Dan here, and one of the things I asked Dan is, if this is the last time you got an opportunity to share with folks that which is most important to you and what you would want them to go away with and to receive, just to be thinking about that. So whatever's on Dan's heart, just turn it over to him, and he could just share whatever he feels is important. So go ahead, Dan, just take it away.
Well, I had been thinking something about just how this is presented and how people perceive some of the things we talk about. And even though this happened to me personally in my life, and there are personal aspects to it, the greater picture is the fact that this happened to the church. And I was thinking about the fact that I have to deal with the aspects that represent my history in my life, but just to stand back and to look at the perspective of what it means to the church and what it means to the Lord. I know someone I was visiting with really picked, when all the things you can talk about, picked the topic of the Nephilim and said, why is that important? Okay, yes, they were there in Genesis 6, and there are these other things said, but why is it important? And I was able to just kind of visit and say, well, if we just stand back and look at the whole panoramic view of where we are in church history, how does that fit in? And it fits in very significantly because it represents, and all that Doug has shared, but it represents a coming in of that which is going to be a great deception in the very near future, where these creatures who are Nephilim are going to be represented as aliens who come with different motives. Some probably will have ulterior motives presented, and some will have redeeming motives as far as coming here to save us or whatever it is. But that in and of itself is just a part of where we are. And I was just thinking about how, for me, it started, and it starts, as Doug has said, when you get to a certain point, and what's released is that which represents the sense of knowing, and the neshama.